time. 25 years in December, and we haven't had a whole lot of Sunday afternoons here in the fall where the Orioles game starts at 3, the Ravens start at 1, the Ravens go down early, the Ravens come back, the Orioles come back, the Orioles win, the Ravens didn't win, but at least the Orioles will be playing some playoff baseball this week. Luke Jones is here to discuss all things an exciting October Sunday. Certainly didn't work out the way we wanted it to work out on the football side, Luke, but all is not lost, and certainly for the Ravens, a very, very frustrating loss, and one that, we're going to add up how huge that 1 point is going to be in the coming weeks, especially in a conference game. It was sitting there, man, and you could sense the amount of frustration in that locker room afterwards, Luke.
Yeah, and just a strange game, and I'll go back to what I tweeted as the final seconds ticked away and the Ravens suffered their first loss of the year. It was just another example of the Ravens playing poorly for too many stretches within a game. Now, certainly the offense for much of the first half, pass protection really the entire game, running game finally gets going in the second half, but again, another slow start. Defensively, now, look at that second half. They give up 5 total yards in the third quarter, and then they give up 2 touchdown passes in the fourth quarter. I mean, just one of those games where they played well enough to win at times, and they certainly played poorly at other stretches of the game. And typically you do that too often. Well, they came up on the positive end the first 3 weeks. It got them in week 4, and they suffered a loss against what I think is a good Oakland team. I don't think this is a loss that totally diminishes or erases what the Ravens did or discredits the fact that they were 3-0 against 3 underwhelming opponents. But at the same time, this is their home turf, and we know how the Ravens historically have played in Baltimore, and to come up short, for the defense to come up short, and certainly the offense, at times got it going, but overall very, very inconsistent. It just added up to, as you said, a missed opportunity, but another game where the Ravens didn't come close to playing a complete, or even close to 60 minutes.
Yeah, I guess we start to assess what went wrong, right? So let's do the ugly, and then we can do the pretty later on, and talk about some guys who did emerge through all of this. But the ugly part of this has to be, where is the offensive line, right? I mean, for the running game, for the passing game, for the protection of the quarterback, for their ability to get first downs, this is not ideal. Obviously, the guy they want starting at left tackle couldn't play. The guy they drafted couldn't play. The guy they wanted to start at left guard wasn't playing. The guy that they wanted to be the backup left tackle is the left guard, and he's hurt. We had Ryan Jensen out this week, and the James Hurst situation, there's a reason that he's not a starter to begin with, and you start to really see it over 60 minutes how devastating it can be when that part of the game is really inconsistent, especially against this type of pass rush. I mean, the Raiders had been a little quiet the first couple of weeks. I don't think anybody thought that about Khalil Mack. At some point, it was a mismatch. It was a mismatch all day long.
Yeah, and to your point about Khalil Mack, even though he hadn't had a sack through the first 3 weeks, we saw last year what kind of player this guy is. I mean, he's one of the top 5 defensive players in football, for my money. So even if Ronnie Stanley, even if Alex Lewis had been at left tackle.
Or John Ogden.
Well, maybe. Who knows? I mean, Dwight Freeney always had Jonathan Ogden's number relative to everyone else. But, it was going to be a challenge no matter who was in there. But clearly, James Hurst, we know the story here. I mean, at this point, it's almost like piling on. The thing I was surprised about was, frankly, how many times they left him one-on-one with Khalil Mack. Now, Bruce Irvin also had gave the Ravens plenty of trouble as well. Of course, he had the sack strip with the strip sack with Flacco at the beginning of the fourth quarter that set up the touchdown. Right. So it's not as though that it was only Khalil Mack, but when you're missing your entire left side of the offensive line, and the fact that the Ravens are starting 2 rookies there. Stanley's a unique talent. Alex Lewis, they really like, but he's a 4th-round rookie. So it kind of shows you where they are anyway with that offensive line experience on the left side, and then neither of them play. Well, you're kind of bracing yourself to that kind of thing happening, and sure enough, it did. I mean, Joe Flacco, he was under duress for just about the entire day. It was not pretty to see. Got hit hard. Fortunately, he said after the game that he was healthy. Might be sore as he wakes up Monday morning. I'm sure he probably will be, but overall, just, it's hard to put it in the same context of what we saw from the offensive line in the first 3 weeks as far as the lack of the run blocking. The pass protection over the first 3 weeks, for the most part, had been okay. They'd had their stretches where they struggled, but when you're missing your left tackle and your left guard, I don't know what you can really expect, especially against a front that has one of the best defensive players in the league. So, in that sense, I'm not terribly surprised that it looked the way it did. That said, John Harbaugh and company not going to be happy about that because, it really made it very, very difficult to operate. That entire first half was just, frankly, was really poor from the Ravens offense. Like pass rush, the running game to that point, it just, taking no deep shots once again, and I get it. Teams aren't putting a safety in the box. They're playing double safeties, deep, cover two kind of coverage to take away the deep ball. But at the same time, you got to be aggressive and take some shots. I mean, you look at the end of the day, Joe Flacco throws 52 times and doesn't even crack 300 yards. That's a major problem.
Yeah, he talked about that in the postgame. Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not even saying that's on Joe Flacco, although certainly, a couple throws late in the game, particularly on that final drive, he'd like to have back, including the one to Pitta where he wasn't under duress and it was just a bad throw. But overall, I mean, it's just, when you're having to be that methodical and you're not being efficient in trying to grind out those 5-6 yard passes, that kind of a passing game where you have to move down the field. They did get the running game going, albeit against an Oakland defense that we know was pretty terrible, was 29th against the run. So I'm hesitant, as good as Terrence West played, I'm hesitant to just say, well, that's fixed, because they didn't exactly go up against a great defense. So, it's just right now, I mean,
it's moving parts. There's a lot of moving parts, and that you can't have success in this league when your left tackle, your left guard, your running backs unsettled. There's just a lot of unsettled going on, and even guys like Zuda not playing all that great, right?
Yeah, just disjointed. And one thing we didn't even talk about, the penalty.
Sure.
I mean, think about how many drives, where penalties hurt them. It's very disjointed. Through 4 weeks, and they're 3-1. Again, we're reminding everyone that they're 3-1.
And they lost by a point. I mean, they were a point from being 4-0. So let's call it what it is. I mean, it's ugly. It's awful. But the fire Harbaugh and the bench Flacco stuff. We're not doing that this week. I mean, go over with those dimwits over 105.7 and do that. I can't take it. I mean, 5 minutes after the game, if that's where you are, I mean, there are issues here, and there's plenty to talk about. But part of it is just getting your starters on the field. If your starters aren't on the field, it's hard to judge all of this with the moving parts, I think.
It is. Now, I will say this. The criticism from Mark Trestman is warranted at this point. This team and a lot of these issues go back to last year. The running game wasn't effective last year. They got off to slow starts last year. And, yes, personnel, and I've been someone that's been very, very vocal about not thinking the personnel has always been what the Ravens have needed. But, you do look at this, and I just talked about the left side of the offensive line. That was the big issue on Sunday. But, at the same time, this is a defense that they played on Sunday that gave up over 1,000 yards its first 2 games this year. I mean, to only come up with 6 points in the first half, I mean, as Flacco said, it just puts you in a position where you have to play so well the rest of the way to really give yourself a good chance to win. And I just think it's very difficult to do that. You just give yourself such little margin for error.
And they did play well, by the way, right? I mean, they did play well. They did come back. They did hit big plays. They did make some big plays. So they did play well until the bitter end when they didn't, and they couldn't, the last 3 minutes.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, you leave yourself with such little margin for error. I mean, and I'll go back to what I said about the defense. I mean, the defense played exceptionally well for large portions of this game, but when your offense is basically sleepwalking through the first 30 minutes and isn't able to put points on the board other than a couple field goals, it just makes things that much more difficult for them as well. And again, as we said at the beginning of this conversation, this is a pretty good Oakland team, and specifically the offense. I mean, I think despite the yardage not being put up, Derek Carr under 200 yards, but he throws 4 touchdowns. I mean, that's impressive.
They're going to win 10 games this year, right? I mean, they are. If you look at it, yeah.
Yeah, I looked at them as a very legitimate playoff contender, and not knowing what Denver would look like in that West Division, I thought it wouldn't be unheard of to see Oakland win that division, quite frankly. But certainly you see Kansas City, you see Oakland, or you see Denver. So we'll see how that plays out. But that's not a bad team, and I think we talked about this a little bit last year, and even with the Ravens making the mistakes and not being very good early last year, you saw what kind of talent that Oakland had. So they're a team on the rise. I think. So it's not a case of being overly ashamed over the end result, but I think it's just because they had the opportunities that they did. We talk so much, and I know you talk to so many reporters from the Bay Area about the narrative. The Raiders have been, 1-18 in their last 19 games played in the Eastern time zone.
But most weeks they were overmatched. Most week they came east playing somebody better than them with a team that stunk. Quite frankly.
No doubt, but at the same time, I think if you look historically, even good West Coast teams coming to the East Coast historically, it's a challenge as far as starting slow, being lethargic, yet the Ravens were the ones who looked lethargic and slow early on. The offense, the special teams, once again, you can say all you want about Justin Tucker, and we know he's great, but, coverage, they give up a big return again. Devin Hester, even though he recovered it, put another ball on the ground. They had some penalties on special teams. That's when you're a team that's trying to fight back from being 5-11 a year ago, and they pride themselves on being good on the margins. And special teams is kind of the biggest example of that. And the last couple of weeks, save for the block kick and the field goal at the very end last week, special teams play hasn't been good. And Jerry Rosberg even talked about that this past week. So that was disappointing to see. So again, it just comes back to you're never going to play a perfect game. As much as you always hear people say, play for a full 60 minutes, that rarely ever happens. But the Ravens had far too many minutes, far too many stretches in this football game on Sunday where one of the three phases or all of the three phases did not play well. And ultimately, it came back to bite them. As much as they were able to overcome that and win some close games, the first three games with some of those lapses, it came back and bit them at the end on Sunday.
All right, well, I got to, give props where it's due. I'll hit my man JT the Brick out there on Facebook Live and say, hey, I told Rod Woodson this after. Some days you get the dog, some days the dog gets you. This was a very, very close football game, but when you look at it and say the Ravens, with that comeback, the way they sort of surged at the end of the fourth quarter, made it work on the Steve Smith play, and we can get into the superlatives. We're talking all bad stuff now because they lost. We'll get to the good stuff, if not later in this conversation, at least later in the week. But then the touchdown, they take the lead, 6-point lead, 3 minutes left to go at home. Dude, that's usually shut the door. I mean, it really is. And to some degree, then the defense has to show up and do something. And the defense looked kind of gassed at the end, quite frankly.
Yeah, it looked tired. There's no doubt about it. Keep in mind they had the taunting penalty on Mike Wallace, which I get it, ticky-tack, but don't complain. Remember what happened week 2. I'll just leave that
Hey, dude, don't draw the flag. We knew when that flag came out, it meant 10 or 15 yards, so it gave them 10 or 15 yards. Now, that being said, they needed a touchdown, not a field goal, but but it was there's a lot of stupid stuff that went on in the game. I mean, there's no doubt about that as far as taking penalties.
Yeah, and I mean, that right there, Oakland ends up getting the ball at the 34, but, that was 6 plays, 66 yards. That's not much resistance there whatsoever. They didn't even get to a third down. I think the most, 2nd and 10 was what the Carr threw the 23-yard touchdown to Crabtree on. So, it was very much a defense that looked tired. They looked gassed at that point. I think certainly they had some issues at the end of the game. Eric Weddle was in and out of the game. Ladarius Webb was in and out of the game. So, on that play, Kendrick Lewis was on the field at that point. So, was there some miscommunication? Was there blown coverage? Whatever it was, they didn't make a play. As much as this defense did an outstanding job in the first 3 weeks to finish, they didn't finish on Sunday. And, that was very reminiscent of what we saw last year. Even last year, remember, they had some games where they had some comebacks late. And they made things interesting. We know they always they would lose these games by a single possession, and they just, they came up a little bit smaller than the other team at the very end of the game. That was kind of the overall theme of last year, beyond the injuries and all that, just the on-field product. That's what would happen. Well, kind of reminiscent of last year in that way on Sunday. They, again, had some stretches where they played well, and overall, statistically, the defense doesn't look that bad. Derek Carr, 199 yards. They only gave up 3.3 yards per carry, so it's not as though they got gashed or completely annihilated, but they weren't able to make plays in some critical times, and that ended up being the difference of the game.
The run stop should be pointed out that feels like something that's not going to take a day off, right? That feels like something that during the year, if it gets better, it could get really good, right? Like no one has been able to really run that well, minus that crazy Browns play from scrimmage. They've been pretty tight through the quarter of the season. I mean, if we're going to get into good parts of the Ravens right now, you'd say the good part is it's hard to run against them.
Yeah, oh yeah, and even then, Washington had that 28-yard run. Take that away, which you can't. I fully understand that, but take that away, and Oakland did nothing on the ground, really. So, that was good to see. And I agree with you. I think the run defense, was already, it's not as though the run defense was terrible last year. It wasn't maybe as good as they're accustomed to seeing, but you have Terrell Suggs back. You have Michael Pierce to add to the mix with some more beef next to Brandon Williams at times. So, I think they're pretty good in that regard. And, I mean, it's just, again, it wasn't as though Derek Carr totally crushed them. Didn't throw for 400 yards, but he was very, very efficient. Completed, 25 of 35 passes. I mean, that's, you got to be a little bit better than that. And
well, he didn't get pushed around as much as we'd like to see, though, either, right? I mean, on a pass rush level.
And part of their offense, they get the ball out very quick. I mean, it's very, I don't know if I'd say New England-like in that way, but it's clear they want to get the ball out very quick. But, even when the Ravens sent extra rushers, there were times where they sent 5 or 6 and it didn't get home. And when you do that, you're asking your secondary to do a whole lot. When you're sending 1 or 2 extra blitzers, that secondary has to play tight coverage, and they don't have a whole lot of help. So,
not to mention tackle well after the play, right?
No, sure, yeah. I mean, there's, it absolutely was definitely kind of a team effort in that regard. The run defense was good, but pass rush not what you'd like to see, and certainly in the secondary, for as well as they may have played at times, certainly couldn't get stops when they absolutely needed them.
All right, we're jumping all over the place. The Ravens have lost 28-27. The Orioles will be in the postseason here this week against Toronto Blue Jays. So we're monitoring all of that and shall all week long. Luke and I have our work cut out for us. If you're a Baltimore sports fan, it's a busy week. But we're tearing down this 28-27 loss. And, caught up in all of this is where is the running. We talk about the things being fluid here. The left side, that really is about injury, right? But the running game is really about who's going to do this. And just the benching of Justin Forsett, and I know Harbaugh won't call it that, but that's what it is. Some thoughts from you on that. I don't see it that way. I still see Forsett as a guy who might not have the explosion, but he's going to be in the right spot at the right time. If the hole's there, he's going to find it. I find it a little disappointing that they've benched him, but clearly they're out there watching this. They're staking their wagon to Terrence West, and West did run for 113 yards on Sunday, so I can't imagine that he's not going to be something that looks like the bell cow next week against the Redskins.
Well, I think what's tricky about this, I think Justin Forsett behind a great offensive line that's opening up holes consistently, probably can get you 4 yards a carry still and be a solid back for you. But I think it's very clear. And look, they averaged 5 yards per carry against Oakland. That's great. The Raiders had been a lousy run defense to that point, so you better be able to run against a run defense like that. We'll see how this translates moving forward. We'll see how Kenneth Dixon is in the picture. But I think for now, I was okay with it. I think you had to try to see if Terrence West, he's talked about this a lot, as far as being a feel guy, being a rhythm guy. We talked about this for years with Jamal Lewis back in the day, how, first 10 carries or so, Jamal wouldn't always look all that great. But, you really start to find holes, certainly wear down the defense a little bit more, commit to the run, which was a big sticking point for Mark Trestman and has been, quite frankly, throughout his tenure here in Baltimore. But the Ravens, they stuck with it in the third quarter, and you saw the results. I mean, they were absolutely fantastic running the football. By far, the best they've done in any quarter, any game, at any point so far in the season. I mean, you look at that third quarter. I mean, they were really, really good compared to where they were at halftime. They had run they run 7 times for 33 yards. They had 95 yards rushing at the end of the third quarter. I mean, and all of that was Terrence West. So,
but it still is out of whack. 26 runs, 52 passes. I mean, that's simple math. That's 1/3. Maybe getting on the road to being okay, and certainly in the second. You can't continue to run if you're behind and if it's not working. I mean, at some point when 1st and 10 becomes 2nd and 8 every time, or 2nd and 9 or worse, you do start to say, well, what are my other options here? Let's throw the ball to Steve Smith or get Pitt broken free. Part of it for me was the protection of Flacco wasn't there in the passing game, so they had to do different things. You saw more Crockett Gilmore at the end of the game than you saw Dennis Pitt, right?
Yeah. I mean, as far as the ratio there, I mean, would you like to be carries up into the early 30s? Sure. But, I mean, people are asking for a 50-50 ratio. I mean, and I'm not saying you were, Nestor, but, that's not happening anymore in the NFL unless you're a team that's leading by 3 touchdowns going into the fourth quarter, and then you can just pound the rock. I mean, you don't see that around the league, and I'm not saying that that's right or wrong. It's just the reality of how teams play now and how teams are built.
Well, pound the rock means that you get to run it 4 or 5 times, not 3 and out, right? Pound the rock means you got to keep moving the sticks. That means you have to be able to run the ball. I don't know that I have that level of confidence in this running game to have a 10-point lead and burn the clock. I don't think they can do that right now. Certainly not with this offensive line.
No, I completely agree with you. And, I mean, the Ravens weren't in that position where they had a big lead to be able to do that. A multi-score lead in the second half, that's when you can maybe pound the rock if you're capable of doing it. And I would agree with you. And this goes back to my point about Forsett. I don't think he's totally finished. I'm not saying he can't contribute, but the state of this current offensive line and the way that they've run blocked, I feel you kind of have to go with Terrence West, who has shown more of an ability to break some more tackles and to create some more yards after contact. I know Pro Football Focus has talked about, they keep stats such as yards after first contact, and Forsett really hadn't had much, hasn't really made guys miss this year. So that doesn't mean we won't see him again, but at this point, go with West. You go with Buck Allen, who didn't do a whole lot, but picked up a couple first downs for them. Was a little bit of a factor as a receiver, a couple receptions out of the backfield. But I think right now, and no one's told me this within the organization, but you really get a sense where they feel they're going to be at their optimal performance. To me, is Terrence West and Kenneth Dixon. Kind of a thunder and lightning combination. I think is what they're hoping to see. Now Dixon has to prove he's healthy, and maybe we'll see him against Washington next week. He practiced this week, worked out on the field a little bit before Sunday's game, but still wearing a brace on his knee. So we'll see how that goes. But I kind of think they feel that that's going to be their best combination. And Justin Forsett had a phenomenal season for the Ravens 2 years ago. But that was with Gary Kubiak. That was with the outside zone that they ran so well, and we know that they've really been searching for it. Now, they found something in the second half, to their credit, and Mark Trestman stuck with the run a little bit more, certainly more than we've seen in the second half of this game compared to what we've seen for the most part of his tenure.
Yeah, and this was a team coming west to east, and all of that going on late in the game, but also not a very good defense against the run.
Exactly.
Running against the Raiders, a lot of teams are going to say they did that before the year's over with.
Yeah, that's why I'm not ready to anoint Terrence West the starter for the rest of the year and that the running game's fixed or anything like that. It was progress. It was progress.
Well, and Buck Allen got the ball a few times too, right? So,
he did.
I think he'll get the ball a little bit more, right?
Yeah. And again, it'll be interesting to see how this looks. If Forsett's inactive for this Week 4 game when Dixon wasn't even active, what do you do when Kenneth Dixon comes back? As much as we talked about Justin Forsett, his roster status being cut and that being a paper move, he's not going to be a guy who's going to play on special teams, you would think. So, does he continue to be inactive? Do the Ravens consider moving on from him? A lot of this is going to be dependent on health, and a lot of times those things end up taking care of itself as you go on. But pretty interesting to see how this played out. But got to give credit to West. He absolutely took advantage of the opportunity, and for a guy who'd been talking a lot about, man, he needs more carries to get in a rhythm. an honest answer, even if it's not an answer necessarily that the coaching staff probably loves to hear publicly. He kind of proved it, albeit, as you mentioned, not a great run defense. So we'll see how they do against Washington. But it's clear they need to continue to get more from their running game. And 52 throws, 298 yards. I mean, that's not a formula to be successful. If you're going to throw 50-plus times, Joe Flacco better have 400 yards and 3 touchdowns. If not, you're probably going to be struggling to win football games. And that's kind of where the Ravens found themselves on Sunday, and they came up short.
Yeah, 32 receptions, 298 yards, averaging under 10 yards a reception. That being said, 9 different guys catching the ball. Steve Smith, again, over 100 yards, and obviously a lot of that on the 52-yard. But, dude, I don't know what to say about him. I mean, I'm like... much like everybody, I'm kind of speechless about Steve Smith at this point, right? Like, what hasn't this cat done except win a Super Bowl, right? And that's the only reason he's here. But it's really remarkable. I don't the fact that he can run away from a defense still at this point, the fact that the stiff arm on a 5'9" guy who pound for pound is probably one of the strongest cats I've ever seen, and as Flacco said, still making fun of the fact that one calf is one size and the other one is another size, and yet he can still run away from the fastest men in the world, right? Literally.
It's amazing. And, he doesn't necessarily have the afterburners for a full 60 minutes. I think we've seen him some other times where he's caught passes underneath and maybe hasn't gotten the same yards after the catch, but you can tell it's coming. And maybe he's not going to get all the way 100% back to where he was before the Achilles last year, but it's sure looking close. And it's sure.
Well, how can he be more productive than he's been? I mean, literally through 4 weeks. Go back to the first 4 weeks 2 years ago. I don't think there's anything that he used to be able to do that he can't do right now. Which is usually the first sign. It's like, well, this is changing or that, or he got caught from behind. He didn't get caught from behind. I mean, I thought for sure he was going to get caught from behind, but he's still got a jet. He's still got a second level that I don't think maybe he didn't even know he had, quite frankly. I didn't know what he said about it after. I didn't hear the postgame, but I found it to be a wow moment that a 37-year-old guy coming back off that injury can run away from safeties and cornerbacks in this league. I feel like I've seen it all.
Yeah, and you know what? I don't know if I'm totally surprised, and I mean that as a compliment to him.
Sure.
Because, and look, I wasn't the guy.
But he isn't Superman. He is human, dude, right? I mean, literally.
Well, sometimes you wonder because he's been that impressive. I wasn't the one to make bold predictions as far as what his production was going to look like this year. One, what he's going to look like physically, and two, just because the Ravens have more weapons on the offensive side of the ball. I wasn't sure if he was going to be an 800-yard receiver, 950, whatever. I'm not going to say I thought he was going to be a 1,200-yard guy, and I'm not saying he will be that even. But the one thing that I said over and over throughout the offseason, throughout the summer, and into the beginning of the season was I wasn't going to say that he couldn't do something.
Sure.
It was fair to ask the question, but I wasn't going to say there's no way Steve Smith can't be the same guy at age 37 because, you know what? We said the same thing at age 36, and we said the same thing at age 35 in his first year with the Ravens, and people said about it the same thing his whole career in Carolina. I famously remember, I don't remember if it was last year or the year before, when he was asked the question, when did people start asking you about the age? And he said, when they stopped asking me about my height. And to me, that was like the perfect Steve Smith answer right there. And it's just, don't get me wrong, it's incredible to see. It's very impressive. But I don't feel all that surprised because this guy's just an unbelievable warrior. As you said, the only thing lacking on his Hall of Fame resume is the lack of a championship, and we know that that's a team thing. So
he's working on that. He's trying.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how he holds up over the course of 16 games. Certainly, I think that's fair. Again, fair to ask, but I'm not going to say he can't hold up over 16 games because I've already been wrong a couple times over the last few years. So I know at this point not to say Steve Smith can't do something.
Father Time wins every battle. Come on, you know that, right?
It does. It does.
It's not winning this one yet.
At the same time, it's pretty clear. Who does Joe Flacco trust in crunch time? It's number 89. There's no doubt about that.
Kyle Juszczyk getting more involved in the passing part of the offense, and If Flacco had one pass back, and there were a couple, certainly a little too much mustard on the Juszczyk lob over in the corner. But he did catch 6 balls, and to your point, they're all too short. They're all just, movers of the chains, which isn't a bad thing. You'd like to be a little bit more vertical or explosive, or as Brian Billick would call it. But Juszczyk is, another guy in the offense that I think creates some mismatches somehow and finds some space.
He does. But I'll go back to what I said before. You throw 52 times and your fullback is your second leading receiver, that's a problem. I mean, it just is. And look, Juszczyk had a nice game. Don't get me wrong. It's not a knock on him. But you throw 52 times and your fullback's your second leading receiver, that's a problem. That's you're not being nearly as explosive. You're not throwing nearly enough to the intermediate and deep proportions of the field. And it's it goes back to what Joe Flacco said. It's just so methodical, and when you have to be methodical and you commit a penalty, as the Ravens did on a number of occasions on Sunday, it just sets you up then in second and long, third and long. And, I'd like to see more from Mike Wallace, more from Rashad Perriman, more from Chris Moore. I mean, it's just, they've got some speed guys, and they're just, for whatever reason, and part of it's the run game, but I think a lot of it has to do with not being aggressive enough from a play calling standpoint as well. Got to take some more shots. And, you do that and you hit a couple of them. One, you'll score some more points, so you'll hopefully have a lead, and then that lends itself into running the ball more. But I think it'll just loosen up that defense that much more then for the short to intermediate portion of the field. I mean, it's just something that's missing from their repertoire right now, and just making things too hard for them. But, to your point, Kyle Juszczyk, on 7 targets, 6 catches for 56 yards, good on him. Just from a philosophical standpoint, that concerns me.
Here come the Washington Redskins this week, winners of a 31-20 matchup with the Cleveland Browns down in D.C., so it'll be all the hail to the Redskins folks headed this way. Ravens at 3-1, 28-27 loss. You can find Luke anywhere the internet is served, whether it's orange and black or purple and black. We got a full week here, and the Orioles headed into the postseason. Luke will be on that. He's at Baltimore Luke on Twitter, and Luke at WNST.net. I am Nasty at WNST.net. I'm out in the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world. You can download podcasts, listen when you want, how you want, where you want, from anywhere in the world. It's all brought to you by buyatoyota.com. Our morning newspaper comes to your email inbox at 7 a.m. each and every morning. It is powered up by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. Still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life there. We still have some room on the Giants bus for 2 weeks from now. If you're interested in going to the Giants game, toss us a note. Check it out at WNST.net. Our trip's on sale for that. Last but not least, any breaking news happens first. Sometimes Eric Weddle's in, he's out. The Ravens made a little snafu in the press box on Sunday. We over-texted or certainly texted the information we had. We're happy Eric Weddle's doing okay. Checking on all the rest of the players. We'll have full injury reports on our WNST tech service. That is brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Big week here. What can I say, man? We're going to have some baseball. We're going to have some football. Eventually, in 2 weeks, we're going to have some hockey. Terps are looking good. I mean, there's all sorts of stories in the big city, but we're going to be covering them all on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, and streaming live on Facebook Live, as well as on our WNSTV YouTube channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Taos in Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.